ready? Council ready? I'm going to.
All right, give me one moment. Hard to believe it's time to start again soon.
Mayor Muller, we're ready to start the meeting.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to call to order today's special meeting of the Elmville Town Council. It's Tuesday, November the 7th at 1:01 p.m. With that, Eddie, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Reeves.
Here.
Councilmember McKee-Kent.
Here.
Councilmember Tripp.
Here?
Vice Mayor Knight.
Here.
Mayor Muller.
Here. Thank you. With that, if we could all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you. And now I'd like to get a motion and a second to adopt today's agenda.
So moved. We adopt today's agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? That passes unanimously. And do we have any public comment on anything that's not?
Mayor, can you check if your microphone is on? We're hearing that they cannot hear you.
There they are. Oops. I pressed it down.
There you go.
I thought they were going to stay on.
No, you're good now.
Okay. So, any public comment that's not on today's agenda, you can come up to the microphone and state your name. Seeing none, I will close the public comment session. And now our next item is our housing study session. I'm going to first turn this over to our town manager, Brad Ralston, to give us an introduction.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Good to see a good turnout from the community again. I am going to just quickly talk about study sessions. Study sessions was something that was adopted by the council as part of protocols, or what we're now calling our handbook, our council handbook. And the idea was, in essence, to have these types of meetings, which are less formal, where the community can interact with the council and the staff. So I will be actually, if you were at the last study session where we focused on health, safety, and climate, we had a series of short presentations, and then we generally opened it to community dialogue. You're either, at that time, either welcome to come to the mic. I will try to facilitate who the speakers are, or I was asked this time, and I will walk around with the mic and do the Phil Donahue thing, as I call it, if people are remembering that show, where you can, sit in your chair and say whatever you'd like. But I think we have a series of, it's either 3 or 4 short presentations, all related to housing. In the last session, we talked about health, safety, and climate. We had a lot of good feedback. And this is all part of a process that will lead into budgeting, which we generally start at the beginning of next calendar year. So today we'll talk about housing. On December 5th, at the same time at 1 o'clock, here preceding the regular meetings, which always start at 3 o'clock, we'll have a more general discussion, and we'll start what we refer to as strategic planning, where we start to work with the council, sort of big picture. And then we've already scheduled January 30th to be what will likely be like an all-day goal-setting workshop. So those are usually a little different. Gene Bonanders, who's in the back of the room, who's taking notes and helping facilitate, will actually lead that exercise. And with the idea that we have a kickoff into budgeting. And then the staff's job is to bring back a budget that obviously provides all of the typical services and the things that you're accustomed to here in the town, but then whatever other new ideas or enhancements are requested through the council, the staff will work, of course, revenue dependent or resource dependent to make sure that that's included in the budget, and that generally is a cycle that happens every year or every 2 years. So that's what we're doing here today, and again, it's an ongoing process and really never ending, but with the idea of leading us through budgeting. I also want to mention that as it relates to housing, because we're a small municipality, we do contract with the city of Napa and their housing department or housing authority to do a number of services. So I want to mention just what a housing authority is. A housing authority is a public body that oversees housing projects and programs. And generally speaking, they manage specific programs like Section 8, compliance with what are deed-restricted housing projects. So these are, sometimes subsidized type projects where there needs to be compliance, and other projects that have federal and state funding attached to them. So we do have with us today, and they will be making a couple of presentations, our representatives from Napa Housing, which is Molly Radigan, Stephanie Gall, and John Sakamoto. So they're here in our front row, and so we're thankful to have them, and they do a lot of work, again, for the town, which they'll explain here in a few minutes. Big picture. So in the town of Yountville, we have 4 departments. One of those is planning and building, and so planning and building, and we have Diane and Kyle in the 2 staff seats here with me. Irene Borba is unfortunately out ill today. She's our director, but they oversee planning and building. Gets into, of course, planning, which is all the zoning and land use, long range and short term. Ordinances and policies we have. And then as we deal with building, obviously we're dealing with construction and building permits and what have you. So we do that through that department. I will talk briefly about the housing element and some of the state laws. Gary Bell, our town attorney, will expand a little bit on that, but that's a whole nother discussion. Gary told me he had an hour-and-a-half presentation on that subject, so I quickly cut that, but he will at least give an overview, and I think in the future, if we want to have that presentation, we can definitely bring it forward. There are density bonus laws, which in essence are enacted by the state that allow you to build more housing if you provide certain affordability levels. The town has our own inclusionary housing ordinance. Inclusionary housing, in essence, is similar in that if you include affordable housing, then you're afforded bonuses. So both at the state level and at the town level, there are laws and ordinances. And then ADUs or JADUs are accessory dwelling units. So these are the granny flats or the housekeeper units. They come by different terms, but this has really been a big issue and a big change in state law and really throughout California as we're trying to provide more housing. There's been a lot of talk about how you can do that on existing single-family lots. So we'll get pretty deep onto that subject. And then the bigger subject of subsidized housing, and I wanted to make a distinction between affordable housing with a lowercase a and affordable housing with an uppercase a, which I put here on the slide. So lowercase a is generally how do we build more housing? How do we make it affordable? This is, I think Gary's slide will talk about, California's had a housing crisis since 1982. So this is something that we constantly work on. It gets into issues like zoning, but also fees and, process and all the things that, are just needed in order to get more housing. But clearly, there are many issues attached to that. And so, especially in towns the size of Yountville, where you can almost literally look at every parcel, you can talk about the impacts that has on neighbors or on environmental, areas and, circulation, which is all the roads and all the connections, and parking is always a big issue. So these things are always challenging, but there is an overall effort to improve affordability, which seems like you're swimming upstream in California because clearly, the market tends to accelerate faster than our ability to build. But then uppercase A is really the industry of affordable housing. And there is a whole industry of affordable housing, which is where affordable housing developers will come partner either with towns or churches or schools, and there's a formula to it which really depends on all the funding sources. And there's many funding sources that are available for the affordable housing industry, and that's something that I know that Molly and her team will talk about because they work with those groups. And in the cases of Yountville, when we have those types of projects, they will provide the compliance to make sure that those projects or those developers are complying with all the strings that are attached to the money, because all those funding sources have different strings attached to them. And in order to qualify, you need to make sure they're met and that they're complied with on an annual basis. I think it was, I'm guessing, 5 years ago. Maybe it was when Measure S passed here locally. Measure S was a 1% addition to the transient occupancy tax, which is the hotel or bed tax. So for everyone that stays in Yountville, when you get your bill at the end of your stay, 1% of that goes into this Measure S fund. Right now, it's about $700,000 or $800,000 a year that's collected by the town, and it has to be used for workforce/affordable housing. There's less strings attached to that than some of the stuff that Molly will talk about in terms of federal and state money, but that is a funding source that has been established, and we are working to utilize those funds, and so that's something we can talk about. Then there's a bunch of other alphabet soup I put up here, which is BAFA, which is Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. This is a bond that you'll see next year on the ballot that will provide revenue for housing. LAIHTC is low-income housing tax credits. So these are all different, again, programs that have different strings attached, and all things that we're looking to in terms of being able to build more subsidized or affordable with a capital A housing. This is a little just pie chart or circle that kind of talks about all things that relate back to housing. And starting at the bottom, parking is always this big issue. I used to affordable housing developer I knew would always say, we're just a parking lot away from a deal. And that was always just, the cost of parking is expensive, and also it's something that people struggle with in terms of the need. Yountville obviously is not along major transit corridor and doesn't have BART and all those things that is changing the landscape of parking. But parking is definitely a thorny issue and something that needs to be considered as you build. Streamlining and other incentives, that gets into how do you process permits and how do you make things go quicker. The Surplus Land Act, which is another big issue, we don't really have surplus land, at least the town, so it's not an issue that we need to go through, but it is something, as we're talking about the school site next door, that's not something we control, but there's a new act or law at the state level that's important to understand that directly affects housing. We talked about ADUs. CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, is always a big issue in terms of the process you need to go through to get entitlements. We chatted about density bonuses, the fees and the funding. And then housing elements. This is something I'll explain briefly. It's a very big subject. But all municipalities in the state of California are required to adopt a housing element every 8 years now. And as part of our general plan. So our general plan is, what's considered the blueprint for growth. All jurisdictions are required to have this document, which is based on something that we refer to as RHNA, which is the Regional Housing Needs Application. So this gets pretty wonky in terms of how government works, but in the Bay Area, there's something called ABAG, which is basically an association or a council of governments. They get a number from the state which is how many units you need to build. There's this great debate that goes on regionally as people determine what the allocation is per jurisdiction. So you can see in the Bay Area, the state said, you have to build 400,000 additional units in the next 8 years. And so once they do that, then everyone goes into, it sort of flows through the region, and then the county and the cities get together and they figure out how they're going to allocate that number. It looks like this in the county, the Napa Valley, the county of where you have unincorporated, which is the county land, and then the other 5 jurisdictions. So you can see at the bottom, Yountville with a total number of 72 units, and you can see that relative to like the city of Napa has got, 2,669 units. So, it seems small, but truthfully, it's not that easy. And they break these units into affordability categories, and those are based on median income. So in order to qualify at the very low, moderate, and so forth, you have to, depending on your size of family, meet a certain, you have to be at or below these area median incomes. And the process of the housing element, and this will transition into you, Gary, was really developed, I think, the housing crisis, again, identified in 1982. I think the law was in like 69 or something. I can't even remember. It was a long time ago when we kind of created this idea of general plans and housing elements. But clearly things have changed through, this is we're on the 6th cycle, right? This is cycle 6. So every cycle things get to be more difficult, I would say, but also the state is really trying to put teeth into the law, as they like to say, and trying to require enforcement and a lot more information, because historically this was more of something that the state did to really motivate municipalities to zone for more housing, because that was really the issue. Now it's getting far more into the construction side, where they really want to see you building this, and if you're not building it, then they can go as far as taking away your land use authority and really sort of coming in and becoming your planning and building department. So those are the fears that a lot of municipalities have as we work through this, but there's also many other legislative and legal considerations. So I'll turn it over to our attorney to talk about those.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and council members. So I guess the question is where to begin and perhaps where to end with all of the laws that are up here on the slide. As your town manager mentioned, this could be an entire work session and perhaps 2, just to discuss the topics that are here. But I won't do that. I will just give you an overview in just a few minutes here of some of these laws. So over the last 4 years in particular, there have been a lot of housing bills out of Sacramento that have been signed. You've heard about them in the news. You've adopted some ordinances actually to implement them, things like SB 9, and of course you've seen the ADU ordinance just about every single year as the legislature changes that state law. And you'll hear about that in just a moment from one of your planners in a little more detail. But also there has been a lot of litigation that has filled in the gaps from the courts explaining and interpreting all of these laws. The Housing Accountability Act is worth noting. It's one of many. Among other things, it applies to projects of 2 or more housing units. And the overview is that if the project complies with your objective standards in your zoning code or elsewhere, then the town cannot disapprove that project unless it makes very specific findings based on health and safety or that can't be mitigated. So that standard is quite high, and it's intentional, and it's designed to allow projects where more than one unit are being proposed to go through and be approved unless there's a very good health and safety reason why they shouldn't, assuming they comply with your objective standards. And so when you hear from staff, and you'll sometimes see in the recommendations coming up from the ZDRB that this complies with objective standards, and there'll be some analysis about that or the Housing Accountability Act, that's what we're talking about. And that's all the background work that your staff does with the applicant before it comes up and appears on an agenda for you all. CEQA sometimes applies to these processes and sometimes not. So a lot of these housing laws are ministerial now, and so all actions can be broadly divided into discretionary decisions, where you are deciding whether or not to do it based on your exercise of discretion, and then ministerial. And things are ministerial if you must approve it if it meets certain requirements. So those requirements might be in state law, or they might be in your municipal code, like your ADU ordinance. If something is ministerial, it does not have to comply with CEQA. So it meets the standards, the project is applied, and CEQA does not apply. But if it's discretionary, you do apply CEQA. So depending on which law is being used for the project, sometimes we're following CEQA and sometimes we're not. And so you'll see that when the different projects come through. So we talked about discretionary and objective standards and findings there. That's a long list of bills. All of them go into quite a bit of detail on different laws. SB 4 is the most recent one regarding church sites. SB 8, 9, and 10 were adopted about 2 years ago, and that's lot splits, and also SB 9 units, which are different than ADU. I'll talk about that also during the ADU presentation. But the overview here is your discretion, your process, the requirements for how you review these projects and how you can make your decisions has changed drastically, and your staff's thinking about all of these things as these projects come in and they come before you. That's it.
Yeah, and I'll move into mobile mode here. This is working, right? Everyone's good? This is my last slide, and then I think I'm going to just put this up here so you can use it. But obviously a complicated subject, right? It's like, especially in the state, and where I came from, I oversaw a housing authority. It's great to have the city of Napa here. They'll kind of go through what they do, and then we have a small but mighty staff of 3 in our planning and building department, and so they really spend, I would say, 80-90% of their time just processing permits, and I think dealing with discretionary approvals. So we really do rely on our friends in Napa, as well as our law firm, as well as we have consultant teams that are literally working with the state on trying to make sure that we comply and that we maintain as much local control as we can as it relates to this subject. So it's very important. So we're going to go through a series of I think it's 3 presentations. At the end of those, and I already introduced Jean in the back, so she'll be taking notes. But then we'll have this slide, which is the community dialogue slide. What I would ask at the very end, if there's anything we missed, obviously we can pick up. If there's any specific questions or comments related to what's presented, so what I just presented, I think let's talk about that now. And then likewise, after Molly and her team present, and Diane and Kyle, and then at the very end, we'll both have a dialogue and everyone can participate. And then if there is any direction in terms of the council individually saying, hey, can we spend a little more time, look at this, look at that, then staff will take that. We're not looking to do any voting today and have any formal direction, but I think informally, whether it's through today or through discussions on the street as I see people, or, if the council thinks of an idea. The nice thing about the town of Yountville, again, you can see almost every parcel from our zoning map, and you can have a very specific conversation about housing versus, you look at the big municipalities, including the one I came from, it gets very hard because you have so many general conversations, and a lot of this comes back to the site because, everyone's heard the term NIMBY, and it's funny, the new law SB4, they're now, because they're allowing housing on churches, I heard the new term, which is YIGBY, which is yes in God's backyard. So all of these things, again, kind of come back to site-specific things. But there are other questions around housing, and I do know that, as affordability becomes harder to attain, I'm a renter, there's also renter rights. There's, how do you really look at all, aspects of housing, not just the construction building, compliance piece of it, but how do you, maintain tenant rights? How do you deal with, a lot of the other issues that are associated with where you live, which, go back to parking and circulation, traffic, et cetera. So it's all on the table for today. If you want to speak, feel free just to raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over to you. Or if you're more comfortable coming to the podium, that's fine. And then I'll just do my best to have eyes in the back of my head if there's anyone. But, feel free, obviously, just to interrupt from the dais if I'm not looking at you. And Gene, you can help me, too, if I'm missing anyone. So that's the purpose of today. So is there anything anyone would like to say at this point? Okay. We can then have Molly come up, and Molly and John. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for having us. Molly Radigan, Deputy City Manager, City of Napa. We function as your housing department and as the countywide housing authority, which John Sakamoto, who was recently promoted to housing supervisor, is going to go through. And then my partner here, Stephanie Gall, we run the housing division on the day-to-day basis. So we're here for you. We're happy to be here. I will need to leave at about 3 o'clock if you're still going to get to our own council meeting, but Stephanie and John will be here for the duration. Thank you.
Thanks. We hopefully will be done 3 because that's our time for our regular meeting as well. But go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, and everybody. This first slide will start with the general housing services contract that the town has with the Housing Authority. So in general, the Housing Authority works with programs to provide housing all throughout the valley. So countywide activities include rental assistance and homeless services and projects that are being developed. Under the standard housing services, we operate and work with regulatory agreement monitoring. We review project developments to make sure the affordability that's coming through makes sense for the community. We administer programs, do loan servicing, and monitor the affordable housing regulatory agreements. We also operate the Affordable Housing Grant Administration. There are several different grant sources operated through the state or through the federal government that we assist with the town in operating. We'll go over some more of those in a little bit. And additional housing services that are otherwise mutually agreed upon. If something new comes up, some new program that we want to operate, we can work on that with you guys. So countywide. So Section 8 Housing Services is rental assistance program that's provided throughout all the county. Roughly 1,266 rental assistance vouchers through all the different kind of program sources all through the county. 22 of them are specifically here in the town. Homeless services and projects. We work with the Continuum of Care, which is a group of entities throughout the county working to end homelessness and all the services that are needed to provide. I sit on the board as well, and so does Molly. And the Shelter Plus Care program, which is specific to people experiencing homelessness. We help up to around 10 families a year who are in dire need. So the regulatory agreement monitoring, so for sale affordable housing monitoring, so these were the below market rate units that the town helped home buyers purchase. We verify their owner occupancy to make sure the properties are insured, have their insurance and that their taxes are current. It's important if the below market rate unit is be occupied by that borrower, the original borrower, as part of the deal. We respond to inquiries as well from the homeowners and to lenders regarding the programs. Oftentimes the below market rate unit borrowers want to sell, and so we have to guide them through the process of what that means, how to go about it, as well as refinancing, subordination policies, and what the town would be willing to subordinate to if they wanted to refinance. So the annual rental project monitoring. So for the projects that were built that have affordable housing regulatory agreements, we work with these projects to ensure that they maintain compliance. So we look at the rent rolls, we look at the tenants to make sure that they're all income verified, to make sure that their incomes meet the town's regulatory agreement, just to make sure in general they're complying. And then we follow up when they're not. And then compliance with any local housing preference policies. There have been some of those in the past, but we haven't had anything new come up for that. So the owner-occupied housing rehabilitation program is one of the programs we operate using the grants that we had been talking about. So the Home Investment Partnership grant and the Cal Home grant. So home comes from the federal government by way of the state, and the Cal Home grant comes directly from the state. So as you can imagine, both of those have entirely different ways of reporting, entirely different ways of thinking about it, different regulations that we must follow. So we both administer that for the town used for the owner-occupied housing rehabilitation program, which is a program that lends to low-income homeowners to repair their homes. So we do lots of things with that program: floors, roofs, heating, all those things that homeowners may need access to funds for. So we conduct all the marketing and outreach. We determine the eligibility of the borrowers. We service the loans. We monitor the loans. And then all the quarterly and annual reporting that the grants require us to comply with, and we provide all that as well. Any questions?
Any questions from?
Got some questions to the
Go
council?
ahead. There, can you use the mic because we're recording this?
Okay. When you mentioned the California grant that was run by the federal, what was run by the state directly?
Cal Home is the grant operated by the state.
Oh, it is, but it's run by the federal. I heard that too.
The Home grant. They sound very similar. One Home, HOME, that one is run by the federal government
And
through
the-
the state. So the
through the
federal
st-
government gives the money to the state.
Okay.
And the state gives that money to the town.
Okay.
And we help help the town manage that program.
Okay. Thank you.
They could have named them entirely different things to make it easier, but they didn't.
Yeah, and I think typically those are used for like rehab type programs, sometimes first time homebuyer programs. There's certain, again, strings attached to that money, but go ahead.
So I actually have two questions. One, I was interested because it kind of helps me sometimes to understand concretely how things work. So I know like at Arroyo Grande, the Housing Authority, which is a project here in Nashville of 3060 is involved. Who actually does things like collect rents and screen tenants? And is that done through the Housing Authority? Is that someone else?
Well, it'd be property manager. They do that. And so our role would be to make sure that we follow up with them every year to see what they did, who they rented to, what their income levels were, and get all the backup to make sure that they were in compliance.
So the property manager likely works for some sort of community nonprofit, or
So to your point, council member, some housing authorities own projects and manage them or hire someone, subcontract to manage them. Here in Napa, we typically try to find affordable housing developers who are nonprofits. Occasionally, you will find some for-profit developers who have either a nonprofit arm or they have a mixed-use housing project where they have some market rate and some affordable. But generally, they either manage their own properties or, as John said, find their own property management companies to do that. We don't like being in the business of running the day-to-day, oftentimes because we sometimes have to be the regulatory authority as well. So oftentimes we're in the contract with, or the town is in contract with, and we represent the town on those agreements.
okay, thank you. And then my other question, and this may be a different program, but I know Yountville has some funding for rehabilitation, grant funding of units, and I don't know if the Housing Authority is involved in that or not. But my question is, it seems like a lot of people are not aware of that, and these are actual grants, so it's there are restrictions about selling the house or even the manufactured home. How could we make more people aware of those kind of programs, or do you have a program that makes people aware that these grants are available? Because I'm not sure very many people are aware of it.
Well, to provide an update on that, and we intend to do a little more marketing now that we've gotten a waiver approved. So one of the programs that primarily does this work is the Home Grant Fund, which is from the feds through the state. And they set a limit on the after rehab value of a property, and they arbitrarily set it based on the county, and it was really, really low when they released it. And so we requested a waiver back in 2021 and checked in on it every quarter, and it just got approved. And so that made it difficult to help anybody. The limit was $580,000. So that would mean after we did the work, the property couldn't be worth more than $580,000. And in this town, you could imagine that drastically limits who we can market this program to. It's recently been raised to over $1 million. So that gives us more access to more homeowners who can use the program. So we're going to push that marketing out because that just happened recently.
And if someone that we run into in our community is interested in a grant for rehabilitation, should we direct them to the Housing Authority?
Yes.
Is that the right? Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
straight to us. We'll do what we can.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Sandy Fagan. I'm with the Measure S, the Workforce and Affordable Housing Group, actually farm worker housing as well. And of course, the city of Napa doesn't have a Measure S per se, but what do you do in the course of your work and all these grants that maybe becomes closest to the kind of Measure S work that we're doing, particularly with worker housing and that sort of thing? It seems that there might be a better chance for us to collaborate on some of the things that we're doing. We have money to do that. We've got, I think, a little or $2 million or something available. And so I guess Measure S committee is an oversight committee. So we're hearing about things after they're done. And as a group, we're interested in being a little more proactive. So I'm wondering how can we attach to some of the wonderful work that you're doing and vice versa?
Great. Thank you for that question. So every town and the county, every town, city, and the county, and the unincorporated county, with the exception of American Canyon, American Canyon put it on the ballot. So we all have a Measure S, but of course, and how state law works, we all have a different letter. So it was Measure I in the city of Napa. And so it passed everywhere but American Canyon. And then each jurisdiction has the authority, obviously, as you mentioned, through the advisory committee to make those recommendations for what they do. It was passed 5 years ago. We only have 4 years of collections at this point because TOT comes a little bit retroactively, and we had to go through a process to sort of start to build fund balances, and then we obviously hit the COVID slump where we weren't sure how that was going to impact TOT in the market. So every jurisdiction has the ability to do whatever they need with it as long as it falls into that workforce perimeter. So the city of Napa, for example, we recently actually purchased a property that went for sale. It was in escrow for it was in an escrow agreement to do an affordable housing project, and the financing through that project fell through. So we went right in and we used our monies to purchase that property, and now we're going to try to get out of owning that property by getting a developing partner on board and working actually hopefully with the land trust, which is going into a whole big thing, but basically looking for a for sale opportunity where the land is owned by a nonprofit who leases the land for a very small amount of money, think about like $1 a year, and the family, their qualifications are based on the actual building that they're purchasing and building. So we're getting ready to start that. We also have some of our TOT Measure I money in some for sale units that are being developed by a developer. If you're familiar with the city of Napa, the old Health and Human Services campus. The county of Napa has opted to put most of their measures money into ADU development, which is the next topic John will cover, but accessory dwelling units, and helping builders throughout the county, so it doesn't have to be in the unincorporated area, develop ADUs. The county of Napa also has a workforce proximity down payment assistance program, but what the challenge right now is that was a great program. It was introduced when the housing market took a dive, and so there were inexpensive houses and there were low interest rates. Now there are very high interest rates and very expensive houses. And so it is very difficult to help someone with an income restriction qualify for a first-time home buyer down payment assistance loan, because even the interest rate that they will receive and what their monthly payment is oftentimes doesn't qualify. So I think we all have to kind of go back to the drawing board, which is why we've brought this land trust idea into the city of Napa as an affordability option for purchasing units, for a purchasing program, because it's not as easy with the current interest rates to have that. So I know I'm sure you have your oversight committee, and I don't know if you want to talk about Measure S specifically.
Well, I was just going to mention to Sandy, so thanks for the question, and I haven't met with the committee yet, but I know Celia is behind me, has been staffing the committee, and I intend to be at your next meeting. So, we can talk a little more proactively than just retroactively. So I think at the next meeting we can have a better conversation. I think the fund balance is now about $3.5 million. Oh, I'm thinking of the other number. Yeah, it's 2.7, I think. So,
Sure. And the county will often leverage against cities and with cities and projects. So oftentimes we'll develop housing, we'll put a certain dollar figure in, and the county will also put it in because the county is invested in housing everywhere in the community.
My question is on the Measure S, is there a length of time? Do we just keep collecting the money?
we do.
We do.
There's
Yep.
no sunset. It's yeah.
You don't have to develop within 10 years or...
As I understand, there's no statutory or there's no legal requirement. I think there is sort of a ethical requirement to spend the money at some point. But yeah, so we're working on. I definitely have some ideas, and again, when we meet again, we can chat about it some more. Anything else from the group? I know I had a council member.
I have a question. You mentioned that you have 22 Measure 8 or Section 8 vouchers. What other programs specifically do you administer in Yountville? I mean, you were explaining them in general. These are things that are available, but do we participate in all of those programs that you mentioned?
Yes. In the countywide activities, the town of Yountville could participate in all of them.
I mean, could, but what are we doing right now?
Those 22 may consist of some of those other programs. I did not check. I just pulled them all as a whole general number. So 22, they could be some of the different programs, like Section 8 versus the Continuum of Care, Shelter Plus Care program. They could be here as well, the residents. I didn't pull that granular level of detail.
Well, Section 8 is its own federal program where there's a rent subsidy provided. Home is its own program. So I know you're administering home programs. I don't know. I've never really connected those two in a specific project. But
I didn't mean specifically Section 8. I just used that as an example of, yes, we know we have 22 people who are participating in Section 8 housing vouchers in Yountville. Mm-hmm. What I really wanted to know is what other programs are we actually taking advantage of in Yountville? You sort of mentioned what things are available, but are we participating or are we using?
With a lot of the rental assistance programs, they're driven by the tenants themselves and their opportunities to find these housing opportunities. So they can use them in Yountville as much as they want. It's identifying the unit, finding the unit, and getting the unit themselves.
Okay, so there again, it's the sort of marketing aspect that we don't seem to have in town.
So just to clarify, the Cal Home and Home programs that do the owner and renter occupied rehab, Yountville is fully participatory, and you have your own set aside of dollars. And as John said, we now have this waiver that brought the after market or the after rehab value, so we can do a lot more. In some of our Up Valley communities, we've kind of been sitting on the money and not spending it because we couldn't find eligible home buyers or eligible homeowners, excuse me. So now we have the ability to work with your staff to go out and market it better. Section 8, just to be clear, there's a very extensive, and again, this could be a whole presentation of itself, similar to what your attorney said, but it's a waiting list process. So there's a lottery. Every couple of years, we open the list. Thousands and thousands of people put their name on the list. We select a certain number off of the lottery, and then they get into a ranked order for how they get a voucher. And so you can take your voucher really anywhere in the county. Sometimes you can port it out of county as well. Sometimes you can port a voucher from another county or city in to us. So when we say that you have 22 Section 8 vouchers in this community, it means that 22 people with vouchers have brought their vouchers to live in Yountville. Now, that could become 23 tomorrow if someone is issued a voucher and they find a unit in Yountville. It could become 18 tomorrow if 5 people take their vouchers to another community or the city of Napa or town of, city of American Canyon. So Section 8 isn't necessarily specifically based on a town or a city. It's based on a countywide pool of sorts. But I think the big programs are the ones that John mentioned, the rehab programs. And then we'll get into talking about ADU development and what we're doing, what the county is doing, and what Yountville could be doing if you want to join us in that effort.
Thank you. With through COVID, we all know the stories of renters that took advantage of homeowners and a lot of renters that fell into unfortunate situations and maybe had to declare bankruptcy or were evicted. How long do eviction records stay on somebody's profile for when they're in the future finally working and getting a step up and trying to get into an affordable house, but have that on their record so they're not able to qualify?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it depends on how far you get into the eviction process. The furthest is called the unlawful detainer, where it's basically the sheriff's office goes and puts the notice on your door. If we ever hear from renters who come to us and say, "I've got this problem," we want them to get out of it voluntarily long before the eviction ever takes place, because I believe it's at least 3 to 5 years that something stays on your record, and that has been a challenge for us because the state of California had rental protections for about 3 years, and then they went away. And we have seen, not so much here in Yountville, but in the county, an increase in the number of unlawful detainers, an increase of number of families homeless for the first time because they had those protections, and then those protections went away. So it's something that we have a subcontract through the Continuum of Care, which Yountville is a member of as part of this county, where we help coach as people start to get those notices, what happens then. Fair Housing Napa Valley, same thing, that they can help coach and what to do. The last thing we want you to do is to actually be evicted through the unlawful.
My question came from the concern over a constituent here living with a sister or with the relatives and not able to qualify because like 8 years ago in another state he had an eviction that was kind of just a homeowner wanting to turn over his home. So it just stayed on his record, and he's not able to qualify for any housing.
So we do. There are legal nonprofits and Fair Housing and others that can help remove those evictions from records. So if you want to reach out through your city manager to us, we can try to get you connected with the right individuals who can help with that process.
Thank you.
Nope.
I was wondering if Napa and Yountville have rent control.
No.
No.
Yeah, no such law in the books.
And you're not interested in getting it?
That would be a voter. That would need to go by vote.
Okay, and is Yountville interested in something like that?
Well, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but that's definitely that's a policy decision. So, it clearly could be discussed. There's different versions of it that I've heard, and I don't know if it's been at what level it's been discussed up here in the Valley. I would also tell you that there are state rent stabilization laws that were been put into effect, so it gets into kind of the state and then the regional and then the local level. But clearly, at the end, if council wanted to explore it, there's a lot of varieties of that term rent control, and then rent stabilization has become the more, used word recently, but it's something that, again, if the policy direction was there, that we could discuss. And but it depends on what level. I know that I know actually up in the Bay Area is where a lot of the significant sort of rent control, like I think of the city of Richmond that we studied, and there's a full department that so it gets into the administration side of what exactly are you controlling? But go ahead, Molly.
You're a general law city, is that correct? Yeah. So the city of Napa is what's called a charter city, where the city, when it was formed, wrote its own rules and has its own separate rules, separate from what the state of California requires to do. So in the city of Napa, it's actually written into the charter that rent control is not prohibited or is not allowed. So in order for the city of Napa to have rent control, it actually has to go for a charter amendment to the vote of the people, and the people have to approve it. So it's a much more daunting thing. I think. No, so I don't think it's, you don't have a charter, which is what I was asking your attorney, but, it is something that some jurisdictions have done. It does take a lot of thought and does take a lot of work, because there are challenges that come with rent control as well, how you manage it, how you maintain it. So it's not something that I would say like, oh, are you interested in rent control? Like, let's do it. I think that I would recommend as a staffing perspective that you really do the studies and understand what it means if that's a direction that you want to go, because there's a lot of monitoring, there's a lot of enforcement, there's a lot of processes that go with it. There's a lot of legal aspects to it too. So it's not as simple as just saying we want rent control anywhere and somewhere.
Is there two different rent control policies when it comes to apartments and mobile home parks?
I think any jurisdiction can do how they want, and it can be structured different ways. I know that in the city of Napa at one point there was a agreement that really didn't have any teeth, but it was a friendly MOU between mobile home park renters and mobile home park owners that put a cap voluntarily on rent control. Unfortunately, we're even dealing with that in the city of Napa, where new owners have come in and they're not actually subject to anything more than a friendly agreement, and so we're facing that issue too. So it can be different, it can be the same.
I just wanted to remark, I spent several years on the rent control board for the city of Oakland as a neutral member, so neither a tenant nor an owner. And my only real thought is it is a very complicated process. And a town the size of Yountville, it would definitely require a lot of additional staff, probably. And it has its pros and cons, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it sometime, because I certainly put in a lot of time listening to both landlords and tenants. So it's not a simple process, I guess, is what I would contribute based on my actual experience. So
I would suggest we move to the next, because the ADU conversation I know is complicated. So, and then at the end we can come back to anything. But John, you're going to start, and then midway through, Dan and Kyle are going to pick it up. So why don't you go ahead and get started with the next presentation.
All right. So as far as ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and JADUs, junior accessory dwelling units, the next few slides are based mostly off what the city of Napa does. So we'll keep that in the context. So what exactly are ADUs? An accessory dwelling unit, as we see that, is a converted accessory structure into a housing unit. So think of converting a garage, a separate detached garage, something like that, into a housing unit. Whereas a JADU, a junior accessory dwelling unit, is where you carve out a separate unit within a house, providing its own separate bathroom or access to a shared bathroom, but it has a separate entrance. So creating a house within a house versus creating a separate accessory unit. So that's the simplest terms I could put to think of. So how we operate is, when it comes to financing a JADU, the projects are up to $50,000 at 0% interest, forgiven at 5% per year if the owner is renting the unit out. So that would mean in 20 years the loan would be fully forgiven. And it would be due within 1 year if they decided to stop participating. So when it comes to annual monitoring, that's what we'd be looking for to make sure that it is being occupied by an eligible renter. Part of it is up to $2,000 can be a grant if there's design services needed, and up to $3,000 can be a grant if engineering services are needed, which is often the case when you're doing these kinds of projects. For an ADU, separate, right? It goes up a little higher, it goes up to $75,000. $50,000, similar to the other one, though, is forgivable. So it's structured the same way with a 0% interest, 5% per year is forgiven if renting it out, fully forgiven after 20, due in 1 if you stop participating. And it increases up to $5,000 of a grant if there's any ADA improvements to make the unit more accessible for those with disabilities. $25,000, so that gets you the rest of the way, is 0% interest, deferred loan for 20 years. There are some grants as well, up to $4,000 grant if it's design services needed, and up to $3,000 if engineering services are needed. So program requirements, if it were to be here, it must be located within town limits. It must be a single-family home that is owner-occupied. Obviously, you don't want to be remodeling things if they're not owner-occupied. It must create a junior unit or an existing accessory structure, and it must be creating a rental unit, either the primary unit itself, so somebody could create an ADU and live in the ADU, the owner, and then rent out the other part of the structure, or vice versa. And it must be rented to a non-family member. So this is what the income limits. I'm sorry, I should have made that bigger. 80% of the area median income is what it is set at as far as our program is concerned. And then the rent must be affordable. So based on that 80% area median income limit, you have rent for a studio of $1,868, a 1-bedroom of $2,135, or a 2-bedroom if you were able to carve out a rather large JADU would be $2,401. So it is a fair amount of rent to be getting out of this project. So what we do with the City of Napa is we do the project management of it. So it comes with developing the scope of work, assisting in finding the contractor, overseeing the construction, timeliness, and everything that goes along with it, as well as the loan servicing and the regulatory monitoring to make sure they're being maintained. Okay.
Just to clarify, so obviously that's the City of Napa's program, and it's funded through what source?
PLHA.
PLHA, yeah.
So the public housing local allocation.
Yeah. Which is something we haven't talked about, but there is an allocation to the town of PLHA that we can consider for a similar type program.
Right.
And I know that you were also, I don't know if you were talking about the county program at 1.2, because I know there's been discussion about both.
Yeah, it gets more complicated when you talk about the county's program because their strings are different from PLHA. So if you're going to use PLHA, you have to kind of more gear it toward this direction.
Yeah, so I just want to point that out. And as I understand, in terms of the buy-in for the program, the county has had very few. And in your program, what's been the numbers in terms
We're
of
at
who's
16?
You're at 16, and do you know if the counties?
They're new, and Justin here, and I've heard that they got like 4 or 5.
Maybe 4 or 5. Okay. So there's some case studies within the region that we can look at as we look at what our strings are attached to the money. Why don't we let our staff do that? I just wanted to get those clarified, and then let Diane, and then we could talk about ADUs as a dialogue.
Thank you.
What was the funding source you mentioned?
PLHA. What does that stand for?
Permanent local housing allocation.
Yeah.
It's real estate transfer taxes that are collected by the assessor. They go to the state. That piece comes back to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so because of the housing crisis and it being a statewide importance, and because it's increased even more so over the last few years, one aspect to, in an effort to address those housing needs, is to make the ADU and JADU development process a bit easier. So because of the state, can you all hear me? Okay. So because of the state legislation, it's become increasingly more active in promoting the development, and we've enacted a number of laws to remove barriers mainly for the construction of the ADUs and JADUs. And as Town Manager Brad Ralston mentioned, you guys have seen this over the last 2 years. We've brought amendments to you pretty significantly. So there will be some new laws that will either require amendments to our current zoning code in the near future, or the town if we wish to implement them. So some of them are going to be mandatory, and then some of them are going to be at the town's discretion. One of them is AB 1033, and that's for sale ADUs. So that would basically allow for the sale of ADUs separately from the primary residence, which currently does not exist. My understanding is that this will not be a requirement by the state, but rather up to the local jurisdiction whether they would want to adopt that. AB 976, that's the owner occupancy prohibited, and that would basically indefinitely rid the requirement of an owner to occupy either the primary or the ADU. This doesn't apply to JADUs. And then AB 1332, pre-approved plans. So this bill would require local agencies by 2025 to develop a program and pre-approval process for ADU plans. The bill would require local agencies to approve or deny applications for ADUs within 30 days if they utilize the ADU pre-approved plans, which right now it's 30, but that's to deem the application complete. So there's a slight change there. And then we have 60 days for the final approval. And it can also meet a certain set of building code compliance as well in order to take advantage of that 30-day pre-approval process. And as I mentioned, staff is going to dig more into these laws, and you'll be seeing them in front of you in the near future. So going back to the implementations and amendments to the ordinances that we've done this far, we have Yountville Municipal Code 17.156.010, and that's within the chapter, the ADU chapter, and basically saying that the purpose is to encourage the development for affordable rentals within the town. And so ADUs, as Jonathan mentioned, they can be attached or detached. They can also be they don't have to be a conversion of a garage, although I've seen quite a bit of those come forward in the last, I'd say 6-7 months. I've probably processed 3. And JADUs are located entirely within the primary home. So 17.156.030 covers site and layout standards such as square foot information and lot coverage requirements. The ADUs and JADUs are exempt from FAR requirements, which may have previously limited the construction of these on certain lots. And also setback requirements have become much less restrictive, just meeting a 4-foot side setback, a 4-foot rear setback, and in some cases, if it's a conversion of a structure, an existing accessory structure that has a setback that's less than that, they can maintain those. Oh, we'll go back one more. Another example of relaxing standards that occurred and was implemented into our code to encourage the development is parking standards. So there are a number of cases in which parking is not required, nor does it need to be replaced for the main if it's a conversion of an existing garage into an ADU. And I've also found that the streamlining process that have been put into place, it's not only made it easier for those to construct ADUs and JADUs, it's also made staff's ability to analyze ADUs and JADUs simpler, and that helps us maintain those deadlines, those 30-day and 60-day deadlines that we legally have to meet. And Kyle's going to go over some of the other time frames for the approval process.
Thank you, Diane and Jonathan, for those presentations. You guys handled most of it. I'll just take a little chunk and talk about the permit approval process. So all proposed ADUs and junior ADUs are subject to review for compliance with our Yountville Municipal Code, like Diane discussed. This approval is done through what's called a zoning clearance, and that's an approval done by planning staff. And so this is a ministerial action, meaning it doesn't need to go to any board or council. This action must be completed within 60 days from a complete application. And this decision is final. Often, though, this review may result in comments letters from the planners requesting additional information, which may, it doesn't extend the 60 days, but it might make the process repeat. ADU applications start with the submittal of a land use application, which is available as a PDF on the town website. The application should be submitted via email to planning staff with a written project description and a full plan set. The plan set should include a site plan, demo plan, civil plans, elevations, and materials at a minimum. During review, the planning team may ask for additional information. In the case that the planning officer denies an application for not being compliant with the municipal code, the planning officer will return a written full set of comments to the applicant with a list of items that are defective or deficient and a description of how the application can be remedied by the applicant. The planning officer shall not deny an application for a permit to create an ADU or JADU due to the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions, building code violations, or unpermitted structures that do not present a threat to public health and safety and that are not affected by the construction of the ADU or JADU. If the zoning clearance letter is approved, then after that a building permit needs to be applied for. So the Napa Valley Community Foundation and Community Foundation of Sonoma County partners with jurisdictions in Napa and Sonoma counties to promote ADUs, and they do this through this website called the Napa Sonoma ADU website. This partnership began due to Bay Area housing costs being at an all-time high, especially in North Bay counties like Napa and Sonoma. Due to the limitations of available land and agricultural land uses, there are not many opportunities to build housing, and one of the important solutions is these ADUs. The Napa Sonoma ADU Center is a fiscally sponsored project of Napa Valley Community Foundation with support from Community Foundation Sonoma County and others. They began their work by conducting a series of surveys, data gathering, and focus groups with city and county staff, builders, architects, as well as homeowners who have built ADUs or are interested in doing so. This information has helped shape this website and tools and resources you see today, including an ADU workbook, ADU calculator, and to spotlight some of our Napa and Sonoma County neighbors who have built ADUs. One other important resource that we don't have a slide for is the HCD handbook. That's the California Housing, Community, and Development Handbook. They have a lot of good information about ADUs. And with that, we'll turn it over to the council and residents for questions.
I'd like to add one more thing, just because I'm excited about it. When I was talking about the pre-approved plans, I was working at the City of Santa Rosa, and they had done some pre-approved plans for both landscape and residential homes as a result of the 2017 fires. And I cannot tell you how impactful having those options was. You know, you have a lot of owners that, of course, want to design their dream home or have, you know, their character finishes and things like that. But when you're in a pinch, I think that it's just a great resource to have, and I look forward to that being implemented in the town because it is a housing crisis. So,
okay, thank you. Let's pause now for any questions regarding ADUs. If anyone that just presented or myself, go ahead, Councilmember.
I'm a big proponent of ADUs, and I wanted to just clarify. I think I know the answer, but I would like to see Yountville move even further on streamlining the process for ADUs and the requirements. So, for example, and I commented when we adopted our last ADU ordinance that for some weird reasons, the parking requirements on single-family residences adding an ADU are much more stringent than. And again, we don't have to get into specifics, but I just wanted to make that general comment. And when you mentioned, Diane, that we have streamlined the ADU, I think almost all of our streamlining has been because we were basically required to by the state. I don't believe Yountville has gone any further than what we were absolutely required. So I really like to see Yountville give some thought to how we could go beyond that to really look at streamlining. And so you mentioned like the pre-approved plans. I think, for example, in Yountville, some of those plans wouldn't work because we definitely have design criteria that go beyond pre-approved plans. And so I would really like to advocate for us kind of stepping back and doing a review of what we could do to streamline the ADU process beyond just responding to what the state has forced us to do, basically. And I've shared that with many people before, but I feel very strongly, and one of the reasons I felt a little bit justified was there was a recent study that came out from UC Davis talking about, well, are ADUs making a difference in California? And it was through the Furman Center of Housing at UC Davis. And the answer was, yes, it is beginning to make a difference. And so I think particularly for a place like Yountville, where it could also help not just allowing for more affordable rentals, but people who lived here a long time and could use the extra income as a way of not having to move, it would be a great addition. And so I would especially like to look at ADUs for single-family homes.
I would like to know, where are the pre-approved plans developed? Do we get to do that here in our municipality?
I don't know. I would have to look, do some more research into the developing law from the state. But I know in my past experience, they actually brought on landscape designers and worked together with the city. But I don't know how that
because if we could customize our own plans for our geographic, it might help. But
yes,
thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Molly Sifney and about the Measure S Fund, but we also have the Housing Opportunity Program Fund and the Housing Grant Program Fund, which John talked about in terms of rehabilitation. We have money set aside for programming to help affordable housing, but I feel like what we're really talking about here is this is a conversation about housing opportunities in our community, because as the town manager and the town attorney have talked about, the state requires us to create a housing element, but it's really it's a housing element that says that requires us to create opportunities to build affordable housing, and not necessarily we can't force it, because unless we own the property, then as private property is owned, we create the opportunities. We want to encourage it, which we do in this community, but we can't make it happen. But what I'm hearing is, the opportunities for for working on ADUs and providing those opportunities for people in their own homes is something that we can do and maybe really fits our community. In the past, we worried about too much density on a parcel, but when we talk about the housing crisis we have now, it's really creating opportunities for whether you're going to call it mother-in-law units or generational living, or just providing opportunities for people to work in this community. I think the time is now for us to really promote it, and I support it. I think you're hearing. I hope everyone here and our staff is hearing that the council supports promoting ADUs as much as we can to provide opportunities for people to live in this community, in a small community where we have very few opportunities to develop larger parcels for affordable housing, until someday private property owners create that opportunity for us, in which case we will be very happy to work with them. But let's do what we can in town. I think ADUs are really something that we can that will benefit people that want to live and work in the community, and the people that want to stay in their homes for generations. So thank you for everything today.
Thank you. Yeah, Mayor.
I hate to put staff right on the point right here, but do you happen to know how many ADUs we have? And of those, they're smiling, somebody has the answer, I can tell it's coming, are deed restricted?
So for ADUs built in the past 5 years, we've issued 5 building permits. We've approved more land use applications. I don't have that exact number, but there have been 8 building permits issued for ADUs in the past 5 years.
But I do want to add to that the activity that we've seen since the last round in changing to the objective standards has created I don't know offhand how many applications we have with ADUs. I'd say probably in the last year we've had maybe 10 just in this year.
We've had a lot, and we have a handful right now. So
yeah,
that number, if we had this presentation in a few months, would be a little bit higher, I think.
Yes.
So, but I think really important to me is how many are actually deed restricted.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's not a requirement for us. I mean, we can't force the owners to do restriction.
I understand that, but how many? Do we happen to know how many?
I think it's 0.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
As far as I know, and I think back to my distinction between lowercase, uppercase a. I do think with lowercase a, ADUs are pretty easy to get your head around, because generally, whether it's streamlining or design support, there's ways to make it easier, and I think people are really getting innovative. The question, is does that help in terms of the affordability of housing? Yes, the more you build, technically, obviously price should go down. It is trickier once you start to integrate capital A affordable and you start to get into restrictions and loans and what does that mean and how do you comply. But I was glad that Napa was here to explain what they're doing, because I think you have 2 good models to look at and compare and contrast. And truthfully, with them acting as our housing department, it's much easier for them to do what they're doing than try to implement something that's new. And we will have access to some PLHA money, which would make it pretty easy to replicate what the city of Napa is doing. But again, the county's using different funding sources. So that's where I think the conversation gets complicated, but we can keep talking about it.
Can I ask City of Napa, same kind of question? Just so maybe the last 5 years, how many have you built and what percent have you got into the capital A category for affordability? Of just
Capital A, yes.
Just trying to get a sense how we're doing valley-wide.
Well, just since for the city of Napa, what we're doing through our own particular programs, just with the PLHA funds and the general funds we used, we were up to 16. And those are, I think, of the 16, 14 are deed restricted. 2 of them just immediately paid us back.
Okay.
And just
maybe we have some lessons to learn then. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I did actually, that was my question. The deed restriction usually only applies when you take a loan or get capital A affordable housing. Is that correct? So in as much as Yountville doesn't have a loan program, to build an ADU, generally it's not deed restricted. Correct. So I guess maybe my question is, on loans, do you put a deed restriction? Maybe that's a better question.
Yes, they do.
You do.
So he mentioned they did 16 loans.
Oh, okay.
2 of them, sounds like they paid them back in full, so they got to eliminate their deed restriction. But they started with that program where they borrowed $50,000 or $75,000 to get it built.
So since Yountville doesn't have a loan program, we don't have any deed. I just want to make
Correct.
sure people don't think that deed restriction follows building an ADU. It's
No,
only
correct.
If you have a loan or something.
Only if there's some subsidy or strings attached to it, yes.
Just briefly, though, quickly, I'm sorry, just a moment, Billy. So in 2019, we talked about, in the council, we talked about opportunities with either the county or the city, each of those programs being slightly different. And I think it's, we talked about that before Brad was here, and I think now is an opportunity to get back to that, where we provide funding sources for ADUs. And I talk to a lot of people in my work in Napa, where I'm selling windows and doors to people, where people are building ADUs in Napa, and they may not be going through the process of the city of Napa, but they are building them and using them for rental purposes to stay in their home. And so, we worry about it here, about people adding ADUs because it's going to be a visitor home, and they're just adding FAR to their property. But in the end, it's the opportunities we have to create. And I think we need to have a loan program. I think people will use that, and even if they use it and are able to rent out that property for 5 years or 10 years and pay it back, we benefit. And I think this is the time now to come back to that conversation. So,
okay, thank you. I'm going to go.
My question is for both Yountville and Napa, as far as the ADU sale separate from the primary residence. I know it's not enacted until next year, and you said that it has to be enacted also on the local level. Like I said, I know it's just starting to come down the pike. Have there been any discussions either in Napa or Yountville to enact that and have any things in place to sell an ADU separate from a primary residence in either location?
So this is a state law that recently or was about to go into effect that would allow you to basically condoize your EDU. We have not started talking about it yet and what that might look like. And I honestly, we haven't even had the basic conversation with our council as what that might look like. So I can't say from the city of Napa perspective. We looked at it in the past when it was related just to like Habitat for Humanity type communities. But I don't know where we're going to go on that one.
And I would say we're the same.
I was surprised to hear a garage conversion counts as an ADU.
It can count. I know that. It depends on a number of things. I don't know if, Diane, you want to elaborate? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can convert your garage without any permit. I'll make my garage into a family room or a bar. I don't have to get a permit for that, do I? It doesn't.
It's if you're wanting someone to live in the unit, then there's a set of requirements that are required that you would be required to provide, and those would go through the permitting process.
But I guess what I'm saying is there are a lot of them out there that the town doesn't monitor. I'm sure there are a lot of them in Napa also. But it counts as an ADU, right?
Well, certainly illegal garage conversions is a big subject, but I think if you're living in it then yeah, you have to get a permit to do that. And truthfully, a lot of this, in my experience, comes back to where you live. Sometimes you have CC&Rs that speak to this subject, but technically, you're supposed to use your garage as parking. In most cases, but in many cases, whether it's just storage or other purposes. But if you have someone living in there are health and safety codes that apply that you need to be mindful of.
Is that
It is. I mean, for living. But again, that's a whole nother subject that any dwelling unit or any bedroom, does need to, because you have things like smoke alarms and a lot of other, like bathrooms, plumbing, etc. Sorry.
I would just add to that we have seen, and when I worked at the county before I came to the city, we were actually talking about exactly that. There are several, there are probably units, garages, or things that were permitted to be a shed, but maybe someone is actually living in it. There are programs that other jurisdictions have created where they go from a code compliance perspective, and they allow you to voluntarily come into compliance, even potentially using the loan program to, we know you're doing this. We're going to give you a pass to bring it into compliance and not hold you accountable for your code compliance. But if you don't do it, and when we find out and we come after you, this is what it looks like. So a voluntary compliance type program.
Interesting. Yeah. Definitely something to talk about. Okay. Any other comments on JADUs or ADUs? Okay, so I think there's just one last slide, which is me providing closing remarks, and then we can have a general dialogue. So I want to thank everyone. If you can click to the next slide, whoever's got the clicker. I want to thank everyone for coming, first of all. It's been a great conversation. You heard and learned a number of things that the town is doing. We talked about the Measure S group. I failed to mention earlier, we do actually have a standing committee between Vice Mayor Knight and Councilmember Reeves, where we have met periodically to talk about housing issues. So that's a forum that we have as we try to get in the nitty-gritty. They actually did separately go down and tour the Housing Authority, so we got a better understanding of how the City of Napa is supporting our efforts, and I want to thank you for that. And then I just want to open up the room. I mean, obviously complicated subject, huge subject. I think back to, the Yountville approach can be very specific and even like surgical. It's two things we didn't talk about, which was somewhat intentional, but there's sort of elephants in the room, which is the school site next door and the vet's home on the other side of the highway. I mean, those are definitely part of the conversations that we're having because, if you look for vacant land, I mean, clearly, those are two glaring sites. We also have worked with the Catholic Church site. Now that this SB4 that we talked about is moving forward, I think churches are definitely getting more interested in this idea of workforce housing, particularly when it serves their patrons. So there are opportunities in Yountville. I don't want you to think it's all about trying to cram ADUs sometimes in areas that may be a challenge, but I do think all of those things need to work together as solutions to, this crisis. But at the same time, as I pointed out earlier, the crisis at the state level is creating a crisis at the local level. And I think at the end of the day, we are here to serve Yountville, to preserve community character and make sure local control is something that we're focused on because, I hope everyone in this room believes that, that's where things happen, right? All politics are local to some degree, and you can't have the state coming in and telling us what to do next door with the school site. That would be a big problem. So we need to continue to do our best to come up with solutions so we can be compliant and we can work towards solutions. But I think these are all things to come. I'm happy to, again, facilitate my little run around. Hopefully this has been kind of fun, like trying to get to the right person. But I don't think this is the end, I guess is how I want to end it. Like, understand that this conversation will continue. As I pointed out, we'll have another session December 5th and January 30th. We'll go into budgeting. And once I better understand what resources are available to us, this alphabet soup of PLHA and home and CDBG and all these terms we use, then my job will be to work with the staff to present a budget to the council to consider, and then we can look at things like loan programs or rehab programs or, maybe through Measure S, it's an actual project that we're actually talking about. So again, that's all on the table. Thank you for coming, and if anyone has any final remarks, I'm happy to do my best to, but... Okay, one more.
I already said this, but it's so important to me. I'd like to just say it again. First of all, I wanted to thank Diane and Kyle for their all their work, and I really we've had to be very reactive to much of what's been pushed down on us by the state, us being the town, and it's difficult to shoehorn some of these state provisions into our ADU law and whatnot. And so I find it actually very complex, even though I practiced law for many years. And I know it's a tough job to get it done. But I'd like to suggest maybe we step back a little, and instead of necessarily being kind of not just on the funding issue, but on a whole process of ADUs, what we require, what we allow, and step back and look at it in total. So that we could then decide what would be the best for Yountville, given we do have pretty high architectural standards, and I'm not arguing with that. But there might be some things that we could reduce or change that would make it more feasible. And I feel if we keep reacting to what the state keeps telling us, and as I said previously, many of our changes, in fact, almost all of them, have been due to what the state is requiring, which sometimes is really not clear. What exactly they're requiring, it'd be better to step back. So I don't know if that would be a committee, or it'd be nice to have some community involvement as opposed to just council, but I would really like us to take up that whole issue at some point.
Okay. Any other final thoughts or comments? Yes.
Quickly. Again, I want to second Councilmember Tripp's thanking staff, Diane and Kyle and Irene for the work that you do. But I also want to support what Councilmember Reeves said, is that if the Housing Authority, if you have ideas, if you have projects that you see as a possibility for us to enact in Yountville, please bring them forward. And any way that we can educate the community, let them know about programs that are available, especially with the increase in value for home rehabilitation. People may want to do that. I know in the past it primarily fit into the mobile home parks, but maybe there's opportunities now in other places to use those funds. Please come to us, and staff is very supportive of your efforts. So, and we are too. So thank you.
Yeah, it was mentioned briefly by the Napa staff, but it was a significant waiver that was granted. So what was explained, just so you know, if you wanted to do some rehab on your home that qualifies, the post-rehab value went from somewhere around $600,000 to just over $1 million. So almost like literally doubled. So it makes a lot more homes in Yountville eligible. So if you want information on that, I think it sounded like you were going to start getting more information out now that the waiver's been accepted. Yes.
I just wanted to open it up a little bit more. This discussion was billed as housing, and I feel like people came with some ideas and some thoughts about what you would like to see in Yountville. So I would really like to have more input from the audience about what did you come here thinking you wanted to say or wanted to hear? Because we have presentations all the time from people who are in the business, but what we really need is more input from residents about what it is you see as housing needs in Yountville, what you think is a good approach, where you'd like to see it. All of those things, I think it's important to hear from you. And if you came here with a thought, please share it.
I want to echo that as well. That was what I was going to open up to, is your hopes as well as your concerns. There's a lot of people here that haven't said anything yet, and I'm just really curious why each of you, why this particular topic, why you want to hear more, and what your concerns are.
Okay, we got one more.
This is a little different than what we've been discussing, but I just see the change in neighborhoods with second and third homes and empty homes not being used. And that is a concern because we're losing neighborhoods and community because of that. So I don't know if there's taxation, additional taxation, or what we can do. There's a house across the street from me that was purchased. It's been red tagged. It's an expensive home, and there's a car there. There's never anyone there. The town has had to come in to fix the fence, to maybe empty the pool in the back for that danger, fix the front yard because there were weeds growing. So I just like the idea of community and neighborhoods.
It's definitely a big subject, and we've talked about second and third homes and absentee homeowners, and it's a tricky subject because obviously private property rights sort of becomes kind of the law of the land, so to speak. But I do think, if there are nuisances or impacts on neighbors, then clearly there's a nexus to some form of enforcement or some kind of program that can address whether it's, just let's like, abandoned cars is a good example. Sometimes it's weeds, sometimes it's maintenance issues. But I would tell you, it's very hard, if someone owns a home and they don't want to live there, and it's hard to do anything, obviously, as a government agency, because they have the right to, as long as they're not creating a nuisance or some sort of neighborhood impact, as far as I could tell. But people are getting creative, on the tax side, and I do think there is incentives, and sometimes, the carrot and the stick can be used. So we, and I definitely something we've heard. So I thank you for bringing that up, because that's definitely an issue.
I was just going to add to that. I went through the housing element, and this is the first time I'd ever seen this. Out of 1,320 units in Yountville, how they came up with this, I don't know. 234 are seasonal, so that's a large percentage. That's like 20%. And so I totally agree with you, but I'm right. If anyone has any ideas, other than building units that people will occupy to build up the neighborhood, yeah, it's a tough one.
I just have a general comment. I've lived here for a long time, and I've come to many council meetings. I would like to thank Mayor Moeller and the council and you, Brad, for giving us this opportunity to come together and just discuss neighborhood problems, neighborhood happenings. This really feels good. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and we're here every day.
There's one in the back.
I just want to answer Pam and Robin why I'm here. I've lived here a long time, getting close to 40 years. I came here as a single woman. I couldn't afford my townhouse. I had to get help from my parents to get the loan, and then I had to rent out a little room, and I actually got a permit, or what do you call that, a license. Anyhow, I've seen the changes. We've lost our school. We don't have families. We don't have people that live next door that work here. It makes me very, very sad. I still consider myself a little person, and it's a beautiful place to live, and it's a wonderful place to live. I just don't want to lose that. I don't have the answers, but I have the passion, and I appreciate that we have this opportunity to come together and try to help the problem. And I appreciate that Hillary keeps trying to say, wait, we got the state telling us what to do and we're complying, but let's do it from the bottom up as best we can and retain our special character. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing. All right, Mayor, I'm looking at you. You can.
All right. With that, I am going to ask the council if I can get a motion and a second to adjourn to our 3 o'clock regular town council meeting. They don't want to adjourn. I'll make a motion.
We're like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll move to adjourn. You stunned us. I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion from Tripp and a second from McKee Cant. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? And we are adjourned till 3 o'clock. And we're going to have a pretty exciting town council meeting too. So please feel free to stay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for coming out today.
Thank you. for your comments on the ADUs. That
Yeah.
was very helpful. And also
Yeah.
looking up the grant stuff.
Yeah. Okay.